Often how you treat someone can completely change the outcome of a situation. Let me share a story with you. Back about 12 years ago, roughly at least, when I was awaiting heart transplant, I was oftentimes in and out of the hospital on a continuous or constant basis. Basically, for the last 3 years leading up to transplant, I was in the hospital practically every single month of the year, usually speaking 8 to 9 days. That was about how long I would be in there every single time. And so over the course of time, I got to know quite a few of my doctors, nurse practitioners, nurses, even the cleaning staff, sometimes the kitchen staff. I got to know a lot of those people and really became good friends with some of those, and even considered most of them my family, at least when I was away from home. Now, I despise being away from home, away from my real family, but if I had to be at UAB, that's typically where I would want to be, right there on the floor of HTICU, where I knew everybody and I could get the best care. So, with that being said, one of my favorite nurses above so many others while I was there was a man by the name of Jeff. Jeff was a wonderful nurse. I think he'd been at UAB 20 plus years by the time of this story happening, and I really loved and appreciated him. He was the kind of guy that every time he came in the room, he would interact with me. He would talk with me about my family, my friends, about my situation. He would share stories from his life. We really just had a good time. We talked about pretty much everything while he was in there. And he was always generally concerned about how I was doing, especially emotionally, being away from home. He was there to support and hold me. And I'm assuming he did that to a lot of different patients, but he and I kind of had a connection. And so it was very typical at that point that even though he would come in some mornings, he worked 7 to 7, usually 3 shifts, 3 12-hour shifts. And a lot of times when he would come in the morning, he would have a full load of patients already assigned, but he would say, if you don't mind, can I get Jim today? Just add him to my load. I'm not trying to trade with anybody, just add him to my load. I enjoy helping Jim. And so he would come in and out of the room like that. And more times than not, if I was in the hospital, at some point during my stay, Jeff and I would be, kind of hanging out together, for lack of better terms, as he was a wonderful nurse. That's just who he was. But he came in one morning, and I had had him probably 3 days. The prior, the prior trip to hospital, I'd had him a few times, so I was still familiar with him. But he came in one morning, and he was acting kind of strange. He wasn't acting himself. He wasn't very talkative. He was really kind of quiet. I didn't think a lot of it, but I did notice it when he first came in. And he kind of came, took my vitals, whatever it was he was in there for the room to do, and he left. He come back in a little bit later, and I said, Jeff, what's bothering you today? You're not really acting yourself. He said, well, I'll tell you the truth. He said, I've been assigned a, quote, VIP, and I'm not liking it too much. Said, this VIP, this lady, she's mean as a snake. Said, she's already been cussing and fussing and making complaints, and she's really treating me terribly and disrespecting me, and I can't stand it. It really grates on my nerves when people can be as ungrateful as she is, but she's a VIP, so I've got to act right. And I said, well, Jeff, what does a VIP mean? What exactly does that mean? She said, well, you can be a VIP here at UAB for different reasons. Sometimes it's a political figure. Sometimes it's a celebrity, an athlete, or maybe a family member, one of those. But he said, or as this lady goes, I don't know why they call her a VIP. So I hadn't been able to find out. Her name's not familiar. I just don't know. I don't know who she is. But she's a VIP, so, I have to give her constant care. I'm supposed to check on her every hour and this and that. And he said, every single time I go in the room, she jumps down my throat, has another complaint. And he said, it's really making me mad. I said, well, Jeff, there's not much you can do with that. I said, all you can do really is just treat her the way that you would want to be treated and move on. You have to kind of turn the other cheek, kind of 2 biblical principles there. And he said, yeah, I know that, but it's going to be hard. Well, he made it through that shift, and he came back the next morning. He came to my room pretty early that morning, the second day, and he said, well, Jim, I struck gold again. He said, I got her again. So I got the VIP, but I went ahead and picked you up too. And so I'm going to need you to be my safe haven. He said, I'm probably going to be coming in your room complaining and kicking dust all day, having to deal with her, but, just give me a listening ear and help me, try to make me feel better about it. I said, well, Jeff, I don't know what I can do to make you feel better, but hopefully she's going to act better today. Hopefully, maybe she's been in pain. Maybe she's in a better mood. I don't know. And he said, well, maybe so. So he goes down, apparently at some point goes down to her room. When he comes back to check on me a couple hours later, he said, whew, said she's in rare form today. That's the saying we use here in the South, meaning she's really ramped up her problems. And he said, she's just horribly mean today. He said, she just fires at me. And he said, she asked me if I'd help her roll over in the bed. I tried to roll her over. She claims I touched her inappropriately. Now she's called the nurse manager, going to complain about that. He said, I just walked out of the room. I couldn't take it anymore. I don't know what to do with her. I said, well, Jeff, I don't have any answers for that. But you know who you are. The nurse manager knows who you are. So maybe there won't be too much said about it. He said, well, I know, but it's still hard. It's still hard dealing with her. And so he went on again. Well, he comes back in my room a little bit later, more toward the end of the shift. And as he oftentimes, before he left, he would always check in. He came in, he said, man, I'm thinking about laying out work tomorrow. He said, I don't even know if I'm even going to come. He said, if they assign me her again tomorrow, I'm liable to just quit. I can't take it. And so I said, well, you'll be all right, Jeff. Get you some rest. Maybe she'll get some rest, maybe, and she'll do better tomorrow. He comes in on the third day. So third shift, he's had already 24 hours, headed in toward 36 hours with this woman now. And he spoke to me. He was making kind of first morning rounds. Spoke to me for a minute. I didn't see him for a long time after that. Jeff was gone for a long time. And he finally came in my room. I said, well, how's the VIP going, Jeff? He said, well, actually, she's not going good. Said it's the same thing all over again. Says, I feel like I'm living in Groundhog Day. It's the same thing over and over. He said, this time she's cussing me out as soon as I walk in the room. She told me that she was going to turn me in for this and that. Says I ruined her IV, and she's still mad because she said I touched her inappropriately yesterday. He said, I don't know what's come of that. I ain't heard nothing out of it, but said, she's mad today. Said she's on fire today, and I don't know how much more I can take it, Jeff said. He said, I actually went down to the nurse's desk a while ago and tried to catch my breath, and she's just firing off on the nurse's button, trying to get me to come in there. And every time I go back in the room, it's the same thing again. He said, I'm fixing to just get her told. He said, I've had all I can take of this. I'm going to get her told next time. I said, well, Jeff, you know, you really don't need to do that. That's not the way to handle her. But I can see where you're coming from. He said, well, next time I go in the room, if she hits that button again, I'm done with her. He said, she's going to get it back exactly what she's given to me. And so he walked out of the room. He was still kind of upset, not mad at me, but obviously her. He walked out of the room. I didn't see Jeff for a while. I mean, a long while. Probably, he usually checked in every hour or so. It was probably 3.5, 4 hours, I guess, since I'd seen Jeff, which I didn't need him. You know, I was doing okay to take care of myself pretty much. He came to the room, and he looked very, very upset. I said, what's going on? He walked around. He shut the door behind himself. He walked around. He sat down in kind of the visitor's chair over there. He said, well, I don't think I'm going to have to deal with the VIP anymore. I said, really? I said, is she okay? He said, oh, she's okay. She's the same. And I said, well, she going home? No, she's not going home. He said, I went down to her room after I left here a while ago, and she buzzed the button, and I went down there. And he said, I went in the door with my mind set that if she gave something to me, I was giving it back, even worse. He said, I was going to get her told. And said, I walked in the door, and as soon as I come in the door, it said, kind of caught my eye across the room there. There was a man sitting in the visitor's seat, or that visitor's chair, wearing a black suit. And as soon as I come in the room, said she started cussing, and she pointed at me, and she said, I told you about him. That's him. That's the man right there. That's Jeff. And he did da-da-da-da. And she said, she laid into me, talking about me in front of this visitor, and said the man stood up, and he walked over toward me, and he stuck out his hand like he's going to shake my hand. So I reached to shake his hand, and I looked down, and I realized that this man in a suit had on a badge. And Jeff said he had the same badge on I did. It said University of Alabama Hospital, but instead of like mine saying registered nurse, his said CEO. And he said that's when it clicked. This VIP, quote unquote, is actually his mama. And I didn't know it. And he said she was giving me down the road. And he told me, Mama's already told me all about what all's going on between you two. And so I'm going to finish visiting with her, and then I want to catch up with you before I leave. We need to talk. And he said, I think that's it. I think that's it. I don't know what's going to come of that, but I believe that's it. He said, I guess I'll go down and start packing my locker. After 20 plus years, it's probably all over. And I said, well, Jeff, maybe it's not. Did you do anything? He said, well, it don't matter. Said, the way she's acting and what she told him, even in front of me, he said, there's nothing I can do about it. I said, well, Jeff, I hate that. I said, you're a great nurse. I know you treat me wonderfully and probably everybody else. So he said, yeah, but it is what it is. So he left the room. He was probably gone about 30 minutes or so. It really wasn't that long. And Jeff popped his head back in my room. And I said, hey, Jeff. He said, hey, man, I got great news. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, I went down to the nurse manager's office and sat down to tell her what was going on. And while I was in there, the CEO of the hospital came in and sat down and talked with us for a minute and said he ended up standing up again and shaking my hand and said, you won't believe this. He thanked me for the way I treated his mama. He said he knew for a fact that his mama was the meanest woman who ever lived. He said she hadn't always been that way, but she'd had a stroke a few years before and it kind of got off in her, and said he thanked me for putting up with mama and told me that I had handled her better than anybody had ever seen. He said every time she'd come in the hospital the past few years, he'd get a phone call in the middle of the night. The nurse walked out or refused to treat his mama, or a doctor wouldn't see her because of the way she treated him. Or he said he'd had all kind of problems with her, but said you dealt with mama, and said from what she told me, you didn't really back down. You didn't let her run over you either. And said, I just want to thank you for it. And he said, you're a great nurse. I've already talked with the manager here, and she tells me how good you are. And he said, I think there's a possibility we can get you some raises or maybe even some promotions if you're interested. But I just want to thank you personally. And he's continuing to shake his hand for helping mama. Said, I know she's hard to deal with. She's near impossible. But you handled her well. And said, I think what happened is you probably treated her the way you wanted to be treated. And Jeff said he smiled and said, yeah, that's what I did. And, that whole story, that true story, is an absolute illustration of a real biblical principle. I'm mindful of Matthew's record. Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. I'll pull it up here on my phone. Matthew 7 and verse 12. That's what we call the golden rule. The New King James translation puts it like this: therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Now, those are the words of Jesus. And Jesus said, however, I'm going to rephrase it, however you want to be treated by others, that's how you treat them. Now, that's something Jeff had done. And to my knowledge, Jeff was not necessarily a religious man. Jeff was just a good man. But, when you think about that, and you think about that from a spiritual perspective, how much different could the world be? How would many stories like Jeff's, how would the outcomes be different depending on how he had treated or how we might treat someone else? I guess if Jeff had gotten in there that day and been able to give it all back to her, as he said, and fire back at her and get her told, he might have lost his job like he thought he would. That's not what he had done. He had treated her the way he desired himself to be treated, and that was with kindness. So I want to thank Jeff for illustrating that for me and for showing me that day and giving me that picture, that example of what this looks like. And I want to encourage you, as you face people sometimes in situations that are difficult, hard to deal with, if you will, impossible even, treat other people the way you want to be treated. Why? Because that's what Jeff did? No. Because that's what I always do? No, for sure. But that's because that's what God encouraged us to do. That's what he said. Thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, stay faithful, my friends.